Before we begin tonight's terrifying true story, I want you to think about the last time you made a late-night trip to a 24-hour store. Maybe you needed medicine for a sick child, or milk for morning coffee, or just something you couldn't wait until morning to buy. That sense of safety you feel in a familiar retail environment, surrounded by bright lights and security cameras, where helpful employees are there to assist you. Tonight's story will shatter that sense of security forever. This comes from Lisa, a single mother from Bakersfield, California, whose emergency trip to Walmart at 3 a.m. for her daughter's medicine became a nightmare that still haunts her years later. As I tell you Lisa's story, remember that this really happened, and it could happen to anyone who finds themselves alone in a familiar place when the rest of the world is asleep. My name is Lisa, and I used to think 24-hour Walmart was one of the safest places you could be at 3 a.m. Bright fluorescent lighting, security, cameras everywhere, and always at least a few employees around even during the overnight shift. It was reassuring to know that no matter what emergency came up, I could always count on Walmart being open and staffed with people who were there to help customers. I'd made plenty of late-night runs before, for baby formula when my daughter was an infant, for cold medicine during flu season, for last-minute school supplies I'd forgotten to buy. It had always felt routine, boring even, just another mundane task that parents sometimes have to handle at inconvenient hours. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in March, when my 6-year-old daughter Emma spiked a fever of 103 degrees around 2:30 a.m. I'd given her the last of the children's Tylenol earlier that evening, and with her temperature climbing so high, I couldn't wait until morning to get more fever reducer. Emma was burning up, shivering, and crying that her head hurt, and every parental instinct I had was screaming that I needed to get her temperature down immediately. The Walmart Supercenter on Rosedale Highway was only 10 minutes from our apartment, and I knew their pharmacy section would have everything I needed to help Emma feel better. I bundled Emma into her car seat, still in her pajamas with a blanket wrapped around her, and made the short drive through Bakersfield's empty streets to the familiar blue and white building that had been my go-to for emergency shopping since she was born. The parking lot was almost completely empty, except for a few cars scattered near the entrance, probably belonging to the overnight workers. The automatic doors slid open with their familiar whoosh, and I was immediately hit by the blast of air conditioning and harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly unreal in the middle of the night. Emma was half asleep in my arms as I grabbed a shopping cart and headed straight for the pharmacy section at the back of the store. The place felt different at 3 a.m. than it did during normal shopping hours. The wide aisles seemed longer and more maze-like. The high ceilings created strange echoes, and the background music that usually played during the day was replaced by an unsettling silence, broken only by the hum of refrigeration units and the distant sound of floor-cleaning equipment. But it was still Walmart, still the familiar environment where I'd shopped hundreds of times before, and I felt safe enough with my sick daughter in my arms. I found the children's medicine aisle and was comparing different brands of fever reducer when I noticed him for the first time. A Walmart employee in the standard blue vest, maybe in his 30s, with greasy hair and pale skin that looked like he spent most of his time indoors. He was at the far end of the aisle, supposedly straightening products on the shelves, but I could see him glancing in my direction every few seconds. There was nothing obviously threatening about his behavior. Employees do work overnight shifts, and part of their job is organizing inventory. But something about the way he kept looking at me made me feel uncomfortable. I selected the medicine Emma needed and moved to a different section to grab some juice boxes and crackers in case she felt like eating something later. The employee wasn't in that aisle when I arrived, but within 2 minutes he appeared again, this time pretending to check prices with a handheld scanner while positioning himself where he could. Watch me shop. When I moved to the next aisle for some soup, he followed again, always maintaining the pretense of working but always keeping me in his line of sight. Emma was getting heavier in my arms, and my discomfort was growing into genuine unease. After the 4th aisle, where this employee mysteriously appeared shortly after I did, I decided to test my suspicions. Instead of following a logical shopping pattern, I deliberately went to the automotive section, then to sporting goods, then to the garden center, areas where I had no reason to shop and where an employee restocking shelves would have no legitimate reason to follow. But sure enough, within minutes of arriving in each section, he would appear with his scanner or his cart of merchandise, always with a plausible reason to be there, always managing to position himself where he could observe me. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence, but I tried to rationalize it as an overzealous employee who thought I might be shoplifting. Maybe single mothers shopping alone at 3 a.m. with children in their arms fit some kind of profile that security had trained him to watch. I decided to head for the checkout area and get out of the store as quickly as possible. Emma was starting to feel even hotter against my chest, and I was anxious to get home and give her the medicine that would hopefully bring her fever down. But when I reached the front of the store where the checkout lanes were located, I discovered something that made my unease spike into genuine fear. All of the regular checkout lanes were closed, their lights turned off, and chains stretched across them to prevent access. A handwritten sign taped to one of the closed registers read, "Self-checkout only after midnight. Sorry for the inconvenience." The self-checkout area was located in a corner of the store that felt isolated from the main entrance, separated by displays and promotional stands that created a kind of alcove where customers would be partially hidden from view. I hesitated at the entrance to the self-checkout area, holding Emma and looking around for any other customers or employees who might provide some sense of safety in numbers. But the store felt completely empty, except for the employee who had been following me, and who was now standing at the far end of the main aisle, still pretending to work, but obviously keeping an eye on my movements. I had no choice but to use the self-checkout if I wanted to purchase Emma's medicine, so I wheeled my cart into the isolated corner and began scanning my items. That's when the lights started going out. It began subtly. The fluorescent lights over the closed checkout lanes flickered once and then went dark, leaving that entire section of the store in shadow. Then the lights over the customer service desk turned off, followed by the ones illuminating the pharmacy area I'd just left. One by one, sections of the store were being systematically darkened, creating an expanding zone of blackness that seemed to be closing in around the small island of light where I stood at the self-checkout machine. My hands were shaking as I tried to scan Emma's medicine, but the barcode wouldn't read properly, and I had to try multiple times while the darkness crept closer. Emma stirred in my arms and whispered that she was scared, and I whispered back that we were almost done and would be home soon. But I could hear my own voice trembling, and I knew I wasn't hiding my fear, as well as I hoped. The employee had disappeared from my line of sight, which somehow felt even more threatening than when I could see him watching me. When I looked up from the scanner, I realized that the lights directly above me were now the only ones still illuminated in the entire front section of the store. Everything else had been plunged into darkness, creating a spotlight effect that made me feel like an actor on a stage, performing for an audience I couldn't see but knew was watching. The automatic doors at the main entrance, which had been clearly visible when I entered the store, were now lost in shadow somewhere beyond the circle of light that surrounded my checkout station. I tried to pay for my items, but the machine kept giving me error messages and asking me to wait for assistance. The screen flashed, "Help is on the way," over and over again, but no help came. Emma was getting restless and whimpering softly, and I was fighting the urge to abandon my cart and run toward where I thought the exit should be. But I needed that medicine for my daughter, and I couldn't leave without it, no matter how frightened I was becoming. That's when I heard footsteps approaching from the darkness. Slow, measured footsteps that seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, echoing off the hard floors and high ceilings in ways that made it impossible to pinpoint their exact location. I called out, "Hello, I need help with this machine," but my voice sounded small and frightened in the vast empty space, and no one answered. The footsteps continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, sometimes stopping completely for long moments before resuming. I abandoned the self-checkout and pushed my cart toward where I remembered the main entrance being, holding Emma tightly and trying to navigate through the darkness by following the faint outline of shelving and displays. But as my eyes adjusted, I could see that metal barriers had been placed across what looked like exit routes with small signs that read, "Exit temporarily closed for maintenance." One after another, every potential way out of the store had been blocked, funneling me toward a single exit that I couldn't locate in the darkness. Then I saw him standing directly in front of the only remaining exit. The employee who had been following me through the store was now positioned between me and the automatic doors, his blue vest barely visible in the dim light from the parking lot outside. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, wasn't even pretending to work anymore. He was just standing there, blocking my path to freedom, and in the faint light I could see that he was smiling. Not a friendly customer service smile, but something cold and predatory that made my blood freeze in my veins. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to leave now. My daughter is sick, and I need to get her home." He didn't respond or move aside. He just continued standing there, that terrible smile never wavering, like he was enjoying my growing panic and desperation. Emma sensed my fear and started crying, her fever-weakened sobs echoing through the empty store and making the situation feel even more surreal and nightmarish. I tried to push my cart around him, to squeeze past and reach the doors, but he stepped sideways to block my path without ever saying a word. It was like a horrible game where he controlled all the rules and I was trapped in a maze with only one exit, that he had decided I couldn't use. Behind me, the store stretched away into complete darkness, offering no alternative routes or places to hide. In front of me stood the only person in the building besides myself and my sick daughter, and he had clearly decided that we weren't going to leave when we wanted to. "Please," I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. "I just want to pay for my daughter's medicine and go home. She has a high fever and needs this medication." For the first time he spoke, and his voice was soft and conversational, like we were having a normal customer service interaction, instead of what felt increasingly like a hostage situation. "Store policy says I have to check your receipt," he said, even though I obviously hadn't been able to complete my purchase. "And I need to inspect your bag to make sure you're not shoplifting anything." His eyes moved from my face to Emma, and the way he looked at my vulnerable, sick child made my skin crawl with a maternal protectiveness that bordered on rage. I realized then that this had been planned from the moment I entered the store. The systematic following, the disabled checkout lanes, the progressive darkening of the building, the blocked exits. Someone had orchestrated this entire situation to trap me alone in an empty store with my helpless daughter. Whatever this employee wanted, he had spent considerable time and effort arranging circumstances where he could take it without interference from witnesses or security systems. My phone showed no signal, which seemed impossible in a major retail store, but suggested that something was actively blocking cellular communication. The security cameras that had made me feel safe when I entered were useless if no one was monitoring them, and the bright lights that had seemed protective were now controlled by someone with hostile intentions. Every element of the environment that should have provided safety and security had been turned into a tool for isolation and control. Emma's fever was spiking higher, and she was becoming increasingly disoriented and frightened. I had to get her out of this situation and home to safety, even if it meant abandoning the medicine I'd come to buy. I took a deep breath, adjusted my grip on my daughter, and prepared to physically push past this man who had been stalking us through the store for the past hour. But as I stepped forward, he pulled something from behind his back, a handheld radio that he raised to his mouth without taking his eyes off me. "Code yellow in progress," he said into the device. "Need assistance at front entrance." The implication was clear. There were other people involved in whatever was happening, other employees or associates who were part of this coordinated effort to trap customers in the store after hours. That's when I heard the sound that probably saved our lives, a car pulling into the parking lot outside, its headlights sweeping across the automatic doors and temporarily illuminating the area where we stood. The employee with the radio glanced nervously toward the entrance, and in that moment of distraction, I saw my chance. I pushed my cart directly at him as hard as I could, using it as a battering ram to knock him off balance, then ran for the doors with Emma in my arms. The automatic doors didn't open immediately. They'd been programmed to stay closed, probably part of the same coordinated effort that had disabled the checkout lanes and blocked the other exits. But the car outside belonged to another late-night shopper who was approaching the entrance, and the doors finally activated as he got close enough to trigger the sensors. I burst through the opening doors just as they began to slide apart, nearly colliding with the startled customer who was arriving to do his own emergency shopping. I ran to my car without looking back, fumbling with my keys while trying to hold Emma steady and fighting the urge to scream for help in the empty parking lot. The other customer called out asking if I was okay, but I was too panicked to explain what had happened. I just yelled back that he shouldn't go inside, that something was wrong in there, but I don't know if he heard me or took my warning seriously. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I could see the employee standing in the doorway of the store, backlit by the interior lights, watching me drive away. He was talking into his radio again, probably coordinating with whoever else was involved in whatever they had planned for us. I drove straight to the emergency room at Mercy Hospital, where Emma's fever was treated, and where I felt safe enough to call the police and report what had happened. The investigation revealed that the employee, whose name was Derek Hoffman, had been using his access to the store's systems to create isolated situations with vulnerable late-night customers. The disabled checkout lanes, the controlled lighting, and the blocked exits were all within his authority as an overnight shift supervisor, and he'd been perfecting this system for months before I became his target. Security footage from that night had been mysteriously corrupted, and the other employees he'd called for assistance were never identified. Hoffman was arrested and eventually pleaded guilty to kidnapping and attempted assault charges, but the investigation suggested that what happened to me might not have been an isolated incident. Other women reported similar experiences at 24-hour stores in the area, being followed by employees finding exits blocked, discovering that their phones had no signal during late-night shopping trips. Most had assumed these were coincidences or had been too embarrassed to report incidents where nothing actually happened. I never shopped alone at night again, and I still get anxious in large retail stores even during normal business hours. The sense of safety I used to feel in familiar commercial environments was permanently destroyed that night, replaced by a constant awareness of how vulnerable customers are in spaces controlled by people we automatically trust because of their uniforms and official positions. Emma recovered completely from her fever, but she still asks sometimes why Mommy was so scared that night when we went to buy her medicine. The thing that haunts me most isn't what happened, but what was supposed to happen. Hoffman never explained what his ultimate plan was, why he had developed such an elaborate system for isolating customers, or what he intended to do once he had complete control over someone trapped in an empty store. The police found evidence that he'd used this system multiple times before, but they never found any other victims willing to come forward or any clear indication of how those previous encounters had ended. If you ever find yourself shopping alone at night, especially in large stores with minimal staffing, trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Pay attention to employees who seem to be following you, exits that are blocked for maintenance, or any situation where you feel isolated and controlled. The people we trust to help us because they wear uniforms and work in familiar places are usually exactly that, helpful people doing their jobs. But sometimes they're predators who have figured out how to use our trust and the systems we rely on to create opportunities for harm. Stay alert, shop during busy hours when possible, and remember that the most dangerous situations often begin in the most ordinary places, orchestrated by people who seem completely normal until they reveal their true intentions. Because sometimes the person asking, "Can I help you find anything?" has already decided exactly what they want to take from you.